Hello and welcome to playoff action here at the 2013 U.S. Chess Championship in St. Louis. It's all come down to this. Grandmasters Alejandro Ramirez and Gata Kamsky playing off for the U.S. Championship title, $30,000, and to make their mark on history.
Right, the prestige of the title.
Joining Fischer, Reshevsky, Yasser Seirawan, and
Gata Kamsky.
Of course, a very illustrious list of U.S. chess champions.
For sure.
Of course, Gata Kamsky, the favorite. He's a three-time champion. He's a world championship candidate. Extremely experienced at rapid playoffs. He won against Yuri Shulman in one of these before.
Exactly.
And Alejandro Ramirez, just surprised to even be here.
Yeah, just happy about the opportunity.
Well, I think he wants to win now.
Now he does.
He can smell the blood. He can smell the title. And we are also with Grandmaster Maurice Ashley. So Yasser Seirawan and me are going to take you through some of the analysis today of this exciting game. It's going to be game 25 with a 5-second increment. So very quick games.
Yeah, as I see it on our screen, we've got the names wrong. I guess they had a drawing of lots, just the player sitting down to get started. Gata Kamsky sitting in front of the white pieces on our webcam for game one.
That's right. So earlier in an interview with FM Mike Klein, Alejandro said that he would prefer to be white first. He's black first. There's some advantages to that as well. They do trade colors. It's really important at this kind of level of chess to get a chance with the white pieces in such a rapid match.
Absolutely. White defines the character of the game.
And let's throw to Maurice to give us a little bit of insight about what it's like to be the underdog in this situation.
Well, Jen, I've never been in this particular situation, playing in a rapid match for the finals of the U.S. Chess Championship, and neither has Grandmaster Ramirez. Before the game, he said that he woke up very early. He had the jitters. He woke up at 7 o'clock. He didn't expect to do that, but he had to do some final preparations. He had his normal breakfast at the Krebs place. And he said that with this money, first of all, didn't even expect to win the money. He'd probably buy a house, put it down. He wasn't even thinking about it before the tournament. And also, he has to change his entire summer plans because now he's qualified for the World Cup. And he's going to be in Norway in the summer, and he's really excited about that. He said he feels great. There's really no pressure on him. He was just happy to get this fantastic result. So expect him to play freewheeling chess as he tries to become U.S. champ for the first time. Jen and Yas?
We do have some moves, as we can see here on our webcam. Gata Kamsky played d4. Now, that's interesting. In this tournament, mostly he's been playing e4. Yeah. And in their game in the tournament, he actually played the main line of a Ruy Lopez.
Exactly.
So switching it up here, and unsurprising because Gata has so much experience, he can pretty much play anything.
Right. He's always had that universal approach. I think on the webcam, I'm seeing the move c7, c5. Oops. Hold on. Where did we go? Did he start with d4, by the way?
Yes, it looked like he did start with d4.
Okay, and then we have knight f3, and I am not getting moves on my screen at the moment.
But fortunately, since it's just one game that we're following, we can see very clearly in this webcam shot what's going on.
And it is c5 by Alejandro. I noticed, by the way, that let's go back. Alejandro is working with ChessBase, and he did a video on the Benko Gambit. So after 1d4, knight f6, Gata played knight f3, not wishing to go into a Benko gambit. And now Gata is thinking, well, if he plays d5, am I going to allow a Blumenfeld? No. He's just played g3, which is backing down, actually, from the challenge that Black's second move, c5, made. So d4, knight f6, knight f3. I'll put this up on our screen. c5, g3. And a little surprised that Gata spent a bit of time on that decision, 3, g3.
Yeah, you would think that he would have been prepared for this and just try to blitz out the moves. In general, seeming to be a little bit rusty in this tournament, and maybe that will continue throughout this rapid match, and it'll be closer than a lot of fans predict.
Yeah.
We have some chess stars in the audience here. Elena Katz from the Women's Championship is watching in the St. Louis Chess Club. We've got international arbiter Frank Guadalupe, Elliot Liu from chess.com, who actually is going to be giving out a prize for today's broadcast as well. So hashtag US Chess Champs, bring your questions and comments, and maybe you can win that.
And the players have transposed into a kind of reverse Grunfeld, Catalan, and I am expecting the move c2, c4 after 6 moves of play. c2, c4 is a standard, although I must say that Gata could consider the move e2, e4, but strangely enough, it seems to me that neither player has really prepared for this exact position that has appeared on the board. They're taking some time for what are very standard openings as they try to outguess one another as to what they're doing.
Well, sometimes people just want to get into the right flow in a rapid match because that 5-second increment does give you a little bit of leeway, and if you play too quickly, you can make a big error. I mean, it's the big catch-22 with rapid play. Play too fast, you make mistakes and lose.
You're right.
Play too slow, you get into time pressure and make mistakes later in the game.
Right.
No matter what, you're going to make mistakes, and that's why it's exciting.
Right. Well, it's not so easy to calibrate your play because on the one hand, they've been playing classical chess the whole tournament. The other most standard form of chess is actually 5-minute, which is a completely different
Knight a3 was played. Okay, now this move.
Queen c7, attacking the pawn on c4.
Okay, that's what happened.
That's what precipitated
and then knight
knight a3. Okay.
So he did play your c4 move to start out with.
Yes, and still very early in terms of opening expectations. Why the KG Queen c7? I'm not so sure. Maybe Alejandro was very happy to induce knight a3. Okay, but now knight c6. Oh, he has played d7, d6. Okay. Interesting. Gata wondering how to steer the position forwards from here. I like the idea of putting my bishop on b2. I would probably play the move b2, b3 here if I were white, intending to neutralize the bishop on g7 by putting my bishop on b2.
And there's just no tactics here for black at the moment.
At the moment, especially after the move d7, d6, by the way. There are certain lines where sometimes a d7, d5 can be played when there's a knight on c6. And Gata has taken the approach that I thought he should. He has played the move b2, b3.
And knowing you probably enjoy this position for white. The extra space.
Exactly. The extra space, very difficult for black to generate counterplay. Bishop b, after b3, a7, a6, just ruling out any future possibilities of knight b5. Bishop b2, knight c6, both players playing pretty solid, straightforward moves. Queen d1, d2, and white is the first player to connect his rooks. As we know, in the opening you want to develop your pieces as quickly as possible.
Bishop d7 played by Alejandro, and sometimes a b5 move can occur later in the game.
Exactly.
Rook c1, discouraging that, putting the rook on the same line as the queen.
Right. Now in this case, the knight on a3.
Quick knight takes d4, queen takes d4 has been played.
Bishop takes d4, knight d4, bishop
Oh, bishop takes d4, yes.
Yes.
Yeah, because
And-
otherwise, he's already castled, so otherwise something like knight e8 would probably be annoying.
Right.
Trading off those bishops. I think white wants to avoid trades here because of his space advantage.
Yes, it's minuscule, but it's nagging and long-lasting. Bishop c6, offering a further trade of pieces. And now here, white has a small tactical operation if he wants. He could play the move knight b5. Let me just put that on the board. Queen d7, knight c3. So he could better position his knight, but then after bishop takes d5, bishop takes g2, king takes g2, b5 is a standard equalizing reaction in these types of positions. So
That's right. In these Maroczy bind type positions, you want to either play for the b5 push or the d5 push. If you can get either one in gracefully, usually it means a comfortable equality for black.
that's right. And so here, if Gata is going to try to play for an edge, and I don't really think he's got much of one, he may go for an awkward move f2, f3. I don't like that in terms of playing for e4, and he did play that little tactical operation knight b5. And so I am expecting Alejandro to play queen d7. Certainly a big blunder would be to capture on b5 after captures this rook on c1, pinning the queen. White regains his piece with a huge advantage. So
And that just slashing bishop on g2.
exactly. So that's just a no-go variation at once. So queen d7 is the expected move. Now the knight would have to drop back. Bishop takes g2, king takes g2. b5, not the only move, but again, a very standard move from black's point of view to
And
try
we
to
do
just...
have a knight. We do have knight b5 on the board.
Yes,
Yes.
that's right. And we are expecting queen d7. Not too sure about the clocks, but time definitely not a factor at this moment, as both players have played pretty
Quickly, after the
quickly.
beginning jitters where we were surprised they weren't playing even faster, they've been playing at a steady pace since then. Queen d7, knight c3 on the board.
Exactly. Queen d7.
And now you're expecting b5, this freeing idea.
I'm expecting a trade on g2 first.
Right, okay, yes, they haven't done that yet, sure.
Right.
So, yeah, let's just head back to the position on the board here, which we also are seeing in our webcam. And bishop g2, king g2 has occurred. And now,
b5.
do you feel like white erred somewhere, or
No.
you just think he still has a little bit of an edge because of...
Yeah, well, first of all, he does have a slight lead in development. So, for example, after a move like...
Slight 3x.
Yeah, really smidgen. Gata did not play knight d5. He could have played knight d5 before. Instead he played bishop takes f6 at once.
Okay.
Bishop takes f6 was played.
And now knight d5.
Knight d5.
I see. So he's threatening knight b6 and knight takes f6, but something like queen b7 could save the day, and then we could rescue our bishop afterwards, right? Using
Right.
that pin. So let's, if queen b7's played and white gets out of the pin, so now
I don't know.
with
E4?
king g1 or e4,
Let's just put something on the board.
now we have time to just backtrack our bishop, correct?
Well, it's not that clear, Jen, because after captures
Yeah.
on c4, there's a sudden threat of rook c7 going after this pawn on e7.
So let's see, what else do we have here? After
So maybe in a position like this,
you can't play queen e, you can't, you could play...
we could just capture this pawn, but then after takes, despite the fact that pawns are, the material is even, the broken pawns on d6 and f6 give...
very pleasant for white now.
Right.
So what about queen e6?
Queen e6, careful for...
Yeah, and then you have
a four.
f3
Yeah.
after queen e4 check.
There's
Queen
something
f5.
like queen f5 might be, Alejandro just said, okay, double my pawns if you like. After the move knight d5, he hasn't tried to defend his bishop. Instead, he's contesting the c-file with the move rook on a8 to c8. So here I would expect Gata to accept these or force these double pawns. And now after a move like, well, let's just take this pawn. I don't want to have a split pawn myself. And after takes, well,
let's say with the a pawn.
Sure, because you don't want to give up this d6 pawn unnecessarily.
It's true that e2 is in take after queen b5, but
Right.
it does seem more natural to play a takes b5 because maybe the a file will prove handy later on as well.
Exactly. And now something along the nature of, say, there was no captures on f6. Something like queen d5. White's got a pull, not anything major. Gata kept the capture f6 in reserve for just a moment. He may have had tactical reasons for that. He just captured on b5. We are expecting the recapture a takes. And now, I don't know, I would want to eliminate that bishop. I wouldn't want to allow, queen takes b5.
So he did play queen takes b5 with the
eyeballing the e2 pawn, as you mentioned.
That's right. So knight f6 takes on f6. Now, if white were to play queen d6, queen takes e2, and if you grab another pawn, I also can grab a2, and now b3 tender as well. And this just looks
dead. Equal.
Yeah, totally equal with basically all the pawns coming off the board except for the castled position, very symmetrical.
Yeah, just a wholesale series of captures. And
That's
knight
right.
takes f6.
Not what Gata would be going for here with the white pieces. So now, though, what about just figuring out a way to defend that pawn? Yeah, playing e3 as you suggest.
I like e3, and white's play is a little bit easier because what he's intending to do is simply target this pawn on d6. This pawn on f6 isn't going to be a major target for white. Black is going to play f6, f5 when necessary. So this pawn is the Achilles heel at the moment in black's position.
Hard not to like white. Well,
Yeah.
let's find out what Grandmaster Maurice Ashley thinks of the position so far.
Well, Jen, I've been checking with the computer, and it thinks that black is a little worse, but not that much. Kamsky's been playing very simply, not necessarily the most accurate moves as you can imagine in this very quick time control. So it looks as though there's a slight edge for white, but very tenable. We know in queen and double rook endings, usually even an extra pawn sometimes may not be enough if it's not passed. And right now it looks like Ramirez is holding his own. Back to you, Jen and Yas.
That being said, I think Alejandro's position in the classical tournament was even more comfortable with black. If I recall correctly, that was a Ruy Lopez where he seemed to get a pretty comfortable position out of the opening.
Yeah, but later in the game, Gata was really kicking himself because, as he said, he came back and he said he thought he just had a winning position, and then bang, bishop h3 appeared on the board.
That's right. So he did actually. We felt like Alejandro got a decent opening, but then somehow Gata ended up with an endgame edge anyway. So yeah, perhaps.
Well, in this position, one of the things that Alejandro absolutely cannot afford to do is he cannot afford to go passive. Putting his rook on d8 or conversely putting his rook on e8 and e6 would, in my opinion, constitute passive play. He has to play rook c8, in my opinion, in this position.
And go for counterplay against the a pawn, for instance. So if
precisely, if rook d1, I'm thinking he should play moves like queen f3, and if you win a pawn, you got to go active in this position. Just give up that pawn on d6 and go after the pawn on f2 or a2.
Indeed, it did seem like he's put his rook to c8, and then after
rook to d1.
Rook to d1, he played queen to c2. So instead of your queen f3.
Okay, so Alejandro is willing to sacrifice a pawn and go into an ending that he thinks he can draw rook and 4 versus rook and 3.
That's right. So he thinks that after queen takes c2, rook takes d6.
Yes, rook takes a2.
After rook takes f6.
Correct.
He believes that he can hold the draw in this position, but certainly Gata Kamsky is going to try.
Yes, and Gata tried it a different way.
Okay, so Gata didn't play that.
a2, a4. And again, I don't think Black should go passive, and he did go passive. I was just about to say, I don't think he should go passive with rook.
You wanted rook b2 or something?
Yeah, precisely. I think he should have just continued his idea of keeping his rook as active as possible.
I guess maybe he didn't like rook d6 and taking on a6 though. Or were you gonna?
Well, with the a pawn, rook and 4 versus rook and 4 with the a pawn, that's really drawn. With the b pawn, some chances, but not with the a pawn. What he did do, pardon me, was play rook c6, right? He did go passive after a4. Oops, pardon me. After a4, rook c6. If you can just help me get to the position. What happened after rook c6? Maybe we'll go to Maurice, and Maurice could fill us in on some moves as I was looking at something else.
Yes, actually, after rook to d4, he played king to f8, did black, and then Kamsky immediately played rook to b4. The computer thinks this is really close, practically nothing for white, but we know Kamsky's technique in the endgame is incredible. I remember him as a 16, 17-year-old studying hours and hours a day the endgame. That's where the difference is at the highest level. So I think even though the computer likes black's chances here, that Kamsky is in his element right now. We've got to give the edge to him.
That's right. Computers don't always assess well the practical chances. Like yesterday, Timur Gareev with his better centralized king and his slightly superior chances, that we kept getting a 0-0-0 score. But actually, it was hard for Conrad to figure out how to hold the balance.
That's right.
And so sometimes you got to be a little skeptical, especially in the end games, because computers, blessed sometimes with those Nalimov databases, are able to superhumanize some of the endgame technique.
Well, in this position, I don't really see how white could really make black suffer too much. As long as black keeps an active rook, gets in the moves f5 and maybe h5, there's no breakthrough on the queen side.
And the problem is if we grab that A pawn, you'll just be able to get behind, you'll continue to put pressure on our B pawn.
Right.
And just be able to get behind the pawn, and there's just no way for white to really progress here.
Exactly. Alejandro, after king e6, has played the move rook c2, by the way. So we're in this position at the moment, and instead of rook c5, he played rook c2. I like this. I've always said, like in rook endings, the best way to defend the rook endings, funnily enough, is to keep your rook as active as possible. And as we say in the ending, rooks belong behind passed pawns, and it's true for both players.
That's right. And Gata Kamsky playing a very grandmaster move here, g4.
Right.
We've seen g4 so much in this tournament, usually in the middle game, but here in the end game, just trying to gain a little bit of space and discourage the two moves that you thought would really solidify black's position, that h5 and that f5 move, right?
Exactly. I wanted to get at an f5 a little bit earlier than this. So with this move g4, white's advantage, which is small, just increased a fraction.
But very practical advantage in this type of rapid game.
Oh,
so
gosh, yes.
Maybe tiny in a classical time control where Alejandro has all the time in the world to, figure out how to hold. In a rapid game, really anything can happen here.
Yes. Still better for white.
Not anything.
I mean,
Black winning is very unlikely.
Very, very unlikely. But definitely some pull for the first player. And Gata, like we say, his greatest attribute is his extraordinary technical skill. And here he's got something that he can chew on, like a dog in his bone.
Some more grandmasters and stars literally biting their nails as they watch this game. Grandmaster Ben Feingold, the St. Louis local, and Tatev Abrahamian, who placed third in the women's championship.
Very good. Very good. Enjoying the action. I still don't see too much. Maybe Maurice has an insight. Maurice.
Yes, Yaz, the computer agrees, and I was desperate to see this move F5 show up on the board or H5. I've been ground down by the likes of you, Yaz, in these kind of end games where you allowed this move G4 to happen, and the black king side gets squeezed. You can't really push any pawns because you're going to end up with a bad pawn structure. So the computer itself recognized this and said F5 was definitely better, and by allowing G4, Black has allowed White to have a little bit tinier edge. And Kamsky is feeling better, and probably Ramirez is thinking about this as well. Maybe I shouldn't have let that move happen. So let's see how he handles himself from now on. Back to you guys.
Yeah, nice point there. Sometimes you start kicking yourself, for saying, well, why did I allow him that? Why do I allow him that? And it starts to creep up on your own self-confidence.
Now, why is this such an important grandmaster move to play H5 to prevent G4? Because for those of us viewing at home, G4 just,
looks like an everyday move. Well,
what's the big deal?
Yeah, the big deal actually has to do with these double pawns. The move G4 freezes. Uh-oh, he has played H5. Okay.
Well, that's definitely not something that G4 is usually concerned about, because that creates another weakness, which certainly makes play more fun for White.
That's right. That's another weakness, and that pawn over on this side of the board. Ooh boy.
So you don't like that move H5 at all?
I do not like H5.
So G4, you were just explaining that it was giving White a lot more space and it was preventing Black from really doing much on the king side.
Right.
Yeah. And that can sometimes become a problem, because if White does snatch the A pawn at some point, a lot of times Black's drawing chances revolve around getting active on the king side while the White king moves over.
That's right. That's right. And now that this pawn is weak over here on H5, it makes ideas like Rook B6.
Rook B6, which was played.
Pardon me, F5 was
F5 played and then
first.
Rook B6 in response.
Rook B6. Now you're forced to go behind, Rook B2.
Rook B2 on the board.
And now the idea is that after
Gata prefaced it with King F3.
Right. And suddenly White's advantage is starting to pick up, in my view, because there's even ideas of King F4 and King G5. I'm aware of Rook F2 is in the position currently, but King F4.
Maybe he played King F3 to stop a potential F4 idea. I wonder if that might have been something.
Also.
Just a nice prophylactic move, making sure that F4 doesn't come into the position. For Black, getting rid of his doubled pawn, perhaps.
Mm-hmm. So now, one of the problems, because of this pawn sitting out here on H5, is a future variation like Rook A6, Rook B3, Rook A8, Rook H6. White could, in a near future, trade the A pawn for the H pawn, and then he'll still have a passed pawn. That'll likely be a draw, but this is also one idea of how White could transfer one advantage to another. Also, by pushing this pawn maybe to the A7 square, that would force Black into his king.
Back to F6, that's right.
Right, and that might
ultimately to perhaps all the way to G7 to stop your Rook H8, Rook H5 idea.
Exactly. So still good play here for Gata Kamsky in this first game at the playoffs.
Excellent practical chances, and as the Russian grandmasters often like to say, playing for two results. Grandmaster Maurice Ashley, what are your thoughts?
Well, there's a famous quote, Jen, that all rook endings are drawn. And it doesn't mean that all rook endings are drawn, obviously. But the fact is, rook endings are extremely technical. They stay within bounds. You can often give away a pawn and have an active rook and still draw the game. And that is what Ramirez is doing right now. He's staying super active in this position. Look at his dominant king in the middle of the board. If he were to be passive, Gata Kamsky would just march up. But in this situation, staying very active and preventing Kamsky from making any obvious progress, which is why you see the super technician Russian grandmaster here thinking, how do I do this? Those black pawns look awful, but activity trumps the day sometimes. Still a slight edge for White, though, according to the computer.
We got some great tweets coming in here at hashtag US Chess Champs. I really like this one. This one's from Realtor Derek S. He says, I couldn't make the trip down to the Chess Club and Classic Center of St. Louis for the US Chess Champs, But I'm pulling for Ramirez. If he needs help buying a home, I'll gladly help.
There
Always
we go.
closing, right?
Always closing. Great, great.
So yeah, beware. If you say anything publicly about trying to buy a home, you will get tweets, emails, etc.
Any financial advisors out there?
And we also have Gingy Fan who asks, does the rapid format favor the youth? Nope, I don't think so. I think the rapid format favors the excellent the experience. You know, he can play multiple openings, his strategic sense allows him to play quickly, nerves. So I think that the rapid format actually favors Gata Kamsky in this instance. But I don't know. Maybe would you disagree with that? Do you think that Gata's chances would be even higher in a classical format, or do you think it's about the same?
I think it's about the same, but
Yeah.
I agree with you that experience is huge. Just the whole stress, nervous factors. When you've never been there before, it's tough. Maurice has an insight. Maurice.
Well, my thought is that, yes, Gata is favored here for sure. Come on, the guy's been a world championship candidate. But Ramirez, you know, tournaments are often about performance, how you're performing right now. Ramirez has been playing wonderful chess. He surprised Gata early in the tournament when he shocked him with this move, bishop to h3. Yesterday, he played a brilliant game against Christensen. So I think he's in form. And look at him, how he's just leaning back, relaxed. He knows that this position is within bounds of drawing, even though Kamsky might be the technician, but he right now is sort of the running favorite. Everybody's rooting for him. Gata knows that as well and doesn't care too much. But still, he's very confident, very calm, and maybe youth won't necessarily triumph, but sometimes confidence plays a big role.
That's
and the
right.
capture has been made on a6. Rook takes on b3, and now rook a8 hasn't played.
That is true. We do have a lot of Alejandro fans out there. He is a fun guy. Likes to hang out in between the games. And as Jorge Samor Hasbun told me, there's no word for nerd in Spanish.
Really?
Apparently, it doesn't exist.
I'm amazed.
So the Latinos like to enjoy the chess playing traveling lifestyle in addition to playing some great games. And we do have the A pawn here.
The players have followed
Yeah.
our main line of analysis and have actually simply caught up with us for the moment. So the big deal from White's point of view is he wants to set up the small tactical operation of pushing his pawn to a7 so that he could move his rook to e8 with a discover check in time to promote the pawn. F4 by Alejandro Ramirez.
So earlier I was saying that maybe White played king f3 to prevent that.
I'm not 100%. I guess the line that Alejandro has looked at is a7, king f5.
So a7, of course, threatens rook e8 check, followed by queen. So the king has to
Move
guard
to-
itself from the check by placing itself in front of a pawn.
And we do have this position on the board, and king e2, and this was a nice decision, in my view, by Ramirez. He managed to get this position and trade off his doubled f-pawns, which were a considerable weakness, and he's just played the move fe3, fe3. And I think that operation by Ramirez has secured him the draw. I have to just be absolutely sure of that. It's not 100%, but yeah, I think that this
Yeah,
should
f4
be
looks like
drawn.
it was a nice timely move there,
Well
and that's
timed.
another example of the computer evaluation sometimes being a little off. Actually, computer evaluation shot up for White, but maybe from a practical point of view, the move f4 actually helps Black on his drawing mission. We do have a very elite player, Grandmaster Hikaru Nakamura, still the U.S. champion, by the way.
Oh, yes.
Who chimed in and wanted to let everyone know that not everyone is rooting for Ramirez, and that in fact he expects Gata Kamsky to win this match.
Okay, well, thank Hikaru. Got to respect his opinion. He knows his Olympic member very well, Gata Kamsky. So there we go.
And Grandmaster Maurice Ashley responds to that.
Well, I think there's a difference between rooting for someone and expecting them to win. You might root for Ramirez and still think that Kamsky's going to win the match, right? So there's that very big difference. Of course, there might be something between Ramirez and Nakamura that I don't know about, but certainly Kamsky remains the prohibitive favorite to win. But still, people love an underdog, pure and simple. Folks love an underdog and would love to see a new champion emerge for the very first time.
That's right. We do love underdogs in America, right? I heard that it's the culture is like a bit different in a lot of other countries, and that it's not really considered as fun to root for underdogs.
Yeah.
It's a kind of American mentality that we see in movies, sports.
Right. And we do have moves. I now think that the position is in fact dead drawn with proper play by black. And Ramirez played rook a4, king d3, king f6, and I think that this is the right idea for black. After king c3, to put the king simply on e7, guarding the d-pawn, and whenever white tries to bring his king to the b6 square, the rook's going to drop back onto the first rank and keep giving checks so that harry the white king and make a draw by repetition. This is the drawing technique that I now visualize for Ramirez.
Now, I got a request to show some checkmates. Unfortunately, since we don't have mates in this position, I'll do the second best thing and show a blunder. What about if black moves his f-pawn in this position?
Okay, after, for example, let's just say, let me go back a move.
Well,
king
after
f6.
your move, king e7, you just
Okay.
wipe, well, yeah.
Okay, we get some position like this. This would be the blunder you're referring to, Jen, that the rook would move and skewer the black rook from the side.
Right, and this is kind of a staple of endgame theory. When the pawns are missing from the board and don't shield the king, sometimes this can spell the end for that position for black, even though his rook is well placed and behind the pawn.
Exactly. And I think we do have a number of moves. h4, h3 has been played. King to b3. King to e7, pardon me. King to b3, rook to a1. King to c4 by Gata. Rook drop back, just stopping the king momentarily from crossing the Rubicon of the half the board into black's camp. King has gone to b5, and this was why I thought the king on e7 was so vitally important. Checks to the white king.
Another important note for those of us who don't get into a lot of rook endgames, it's crucial that black keeps checking the king, especially when the king gets up to b6, because at that point, the rook would be released and white would just win easily.
Exactly. So I'm expecting rook to c5 check just to force the white king backwards, which in fact has happened. King e4 played, and quickly behind the a pawn so that there was no rook and queening by white. King f4 has been played. Now I don't want to lose the h pawn, so I would think that a move like rook, the computer sure didn't like that one. Rook a5 would allow the king to jump to g5. So here, I guess the simplest is simply king f6 to keep the white king from making any progress on the king side.
Well, it does look like both players have over 10 minutes, so no major time pressure here. And one little clarification from Grandmaster Nakamura: he doesn't just expect Kamsky to win; he is also rooting for him.
Ah, both. Okay.
Well, I mean, Olympic teammates, of course. I mean, it makes sense.
Yeah.
They've had a lot of experience playing on teams together, and I'm sure they've built a friendship and also just working relationship, really. They're colleagues.
And understanding. And a shout out again to Hikaru for his wonderful victory over the world champion Viswanathan Anand in the Norway chess event. That was outstanding. And Vichy does not lose that many games per year. And that victory with the black pieces is a double victory for Hikaru.
Not his first victory and not his last against Anand. That's my bold prediction. And Grandmaster Maurice Ashley has another comment.
Adding to that, not only his victory against Anand, but his draw against Carlsen as well shows that he knows how to play chess at the very highest level. I would add that in this position, I'm reminded of the position from yesterday that Gureyev beat Holt in, where the position was simply drawn. It was just like, just make a few moves and it's a draw. But the higher rated player kept probing and probing and probing and letting the game continue and continue just to see if the lower rated player would be able to keep up the technique. And in the end, under time pressure, Holt ended up blundering and losing the game. And we were all just so depressed for him. I mean, he just looked like someone totally beaten after playing such a wonderful tournament, slouching at the board at the end. So Ramirez will have to be careful here. He knows he has this draw. This is definitely equal, but don't get into time pressure against a high-rated player. A technician like Kamsky will grind you down. Back to you guys.
I absolutely agree, and shout out to Conrad Holt, who did play a fantastic tournament. And the one consolation for me is it was heartbreaking to see him lose that game, but he did win the World Cup spot.
Yes.
So, I mean, he's got to be proud about that. It was a few $1,000 financial swing for losing the game, but the World Cup spot worth more than that, and of course, just a fantastic result by the youngster.
Jen, I forgot to ask you that at the opening of the show. Do we have a breakdown as to who did, in fact, take the 5 qualifying spots?
That's right. That's Onashuk, Ramirez, Gurayev, and Holt. Yes, as I just mentioned. And then Larry Christensen was the 5-pointer who won on tiebreak.
I see.
So those 5, fantastic 5 indeed.
Yes, our fantastic 5. The magnificent 5. And of
we've
course,
got youth and we've got veteran in there, and it'll be great to root for them.
And in fact, we do also have, of course, Kaidanov and Shabalov, who qualified from the Continental, so that's 7, and then Hikaru and Gata Kamsky, who are qualifying by rating. So we're going to have at least 9, if I understand it properly. And Maurice for more highlights.
Guys, the computer is saying there's only one move right now. It's King F6. He has to find it or else he's going down. This is important that he doesn't lose material. He must play King F6. This is critical to not let that white king jump into the game. And he has found the move.
He's played it.
So he's still fine, well within bounds.
Excellent nerves for Ramirez. He's been playing rather quickly in this endgame, actually, but then he really took his time on this move.
Seems like it was key.
Yeah, spent 2 or 3 minutes on this move, realizing that.
And there was that stoicness of Gata Kamsky. Gata, I think, fully understood that King F6 was the only move to save the game. And when he saw the move King F6, it was like, expected it, never any doubts, but inwardly, I'm sure he felt, damn.
And rook A4 check, King H5, King F5 on the board.
All right, rook A, have to protect the pawn. Gata keeps his king nearby, and King F5 has been played. And now this is the problem for Gata. How does he improve his position? How about E4 check?
Well, I better not play rook takes e4 or king takes e4.
Right.
If king takes e4, rook e8 check.
That's the trickies that white is looking for, so he can promote on the next move.
And if I play rook takes e4.
Similar thought. I just move my rook from behind the pawn, and I'm promoting next. So
that's why it's so important to just keep that rook behind the passed pawn. And it's a mixed blessing to have the pawn on a7. On one hand, it creates tactics, but on the other, it ties white down.
Exactly.
So he has no flexibility here. He's either got to find something or there's nothing. And so instead, as you point out, just moving the king back to f6, because now when you do take on h4, I can take with check and then move on back behind the pawn where the rook belongs.
Precisely. And Maurice, more highlights.
After e4 check, the computer is saying king f4, confidently surging forward, is even better than king f6. And after you lose the pawn on h4 with king takes h4, then rook a3, and white is actually in some sort of zugzwang, unable to make any moves whatsoever without losing a pawn.
I do get to show a checkmate on the board.
So king h5 being impossible because of rook takes h3 mate. So white would actually have to give away the a pawn and then the e pawn, and the game would quickly end up in a draw, peter out. So king e4, king f4 and the king takes h4 is just a draw after rook a3.
Wow, impressive nerves here by Grandmaster Ramirez, who is just defending well in a worse position against Gata Kamsky.
Absolutely.
So fantastic. And we have got some more stars in the audience. Co-founder of the St. Louis Chess Club here, Jeannie Sinkfield.
I see Jeannie, big fan, in the
No
background there, just enjoying the playoff action. And right now, we're having fun. I mean, we're free, loosey-goosey. But I tell you, when you go up there and you're in that spectator audience, you can feel the nerves of the players and the tension increasing with each and every move. It's not a lot of fun being at the board, but you really get the idea of the emotion that is taking place. It is very, very stressful. I'm glad I'm down here with you, Jen.
Oh yeah, it's fun watching down here, but you're right. The air completely thick with tension, and a lot of fun to watch rapid and blitz games in person. So guys should all come down to St. Louis Chess Club for the next major event.
Absolutely. Okay, so what could Gata Kamsky possibly do to force some move? He has played the move e4 check. I was about to look at a position with after king h6, and I thought that was just going to lead to a dead end. He has played e4 check, and unlike the human move, unlike the computer move king f4, I thought the human move was king f6. Ramirez played king f6 in an instant, and we do have king takes h4, and instead of capturing this pawn with a check, Ramirez went for d5. Interesting. d5.
And king g3 looks like it was played.
King g3, and I absolutely do assume that Ramirez's idea is to capture this pawn with the pawn, not with the rook.
Which would lose.
Which would lose, and he has in fact done that. And I like what Ramirez has done here, because this is absolutely easy now as well. King f4 has been played, and Maurice has highlights.
Well, I just wanted to say, Yaz, isn't this a book draw? Even if I take away 2 black pawns from the board?
That's right.
Even without the pawns, you can't win this position. The king stays on g7. This is well known. You need at least an f pawn for white to win the position. So Ramirez can even play e3 check now, donate all the pawns, leave his king right on g7, and there is absolutely no way he can lose this position. This game should end in a draw.
That's right, Maurice. The king on g7 avoids all those skewers and checks that we were looking at earlier. So it's kind of counterintuitive in this endgame, because normally you want your king to be active in the endgame, but here you want to put it far away so that white doesn't have any tricks.
That's right. And just as you said, Maurice and Jen, even without these 2 pawns on the board, the position's a draw. With the 2 pawns on the board, I think after a move like f5, the players would agree to a draw right away. The best that white could do is capture this pawn, and after e3, the rook would have to give up its protection of the a7 pawn, and then it's just dead, dead, dead. So I don't know what the computer is thinking, but I'm thinking the player's about to agree to a draw after the move f7, f5. But a nice test for the young Ramirez, which he passed with flying colors in the first game. But Kamsky is happy that he at least was given a chance to test his technique a little bit.
You only get 1 white. Not so sure, but I definitely, this is great. It's another good endgame lesson for the viewers at home, right? So
absolutely.
Even if you put it on the board, the f5, and then let's just like play take chess with our pawns to show Maurice's point. It's
f5 king takes now.
And no, let's say we play rook. Let's say we just play rook a3 or something, just for fun.
Oh, I see. Just what you want to do.
Just to point out, yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh, you want to take a look and see what the players are doing? Sure.
Okay. Instead of the move f5 as I had recommended, king h7, h5, king g7. One last gasp attempt by Kamsky. He played the move h6 check. You can't take, because we've seen this time and time again. The rook would come with check, and a8 would win the game for white. But now king h7 and king e3, and I'm expecting f5, and I don't see any reason why. Gata's looking at the clock. He's ready to agree to a draw. Maurice, comments?
I mean, it's almost hilarious, right? Gata knows it's a dead draw. He wants to say, yeah, okay, draw, but the guy's not just proving it. If all Ramirez has to do is just play rook a1 even and just look at the position, he knows it's a draw. I'll give you both my pawns on purpose. I'll play rook a1, take, play f5, and you'll say, oh, okay, you know what the deal is. But Gata's wondering, why doesn't he show it, right? There's no reason for Ramirez to be thinking right now. Just force the action, and Gata would just immediately take the draw.
Well, maybe thinking for next round,
and
trying to...
F5 has been played, and this cutesy little move, rook a6. I don't understand why he didn't play rook a5, just keeping this pawn protected. But rook a6 was Ramirez's decision, and after king takes f5, e3, this is how we get to a dead drawn position.
And a
the
draw
player.
has been agreed.
Fantastic performance by Ramirez. A big test in game one of these playoffs. He drew comfortably or a little uncomfortably, but still a draw. Maurice, your insight.
He drew with ease, in my opinion, Yaz. That just showed real grandmaster technique. Kamsky tried for a little something here and there, but he played some really nice moves. I like his idea of f4 when he got rid of his double pawns. We also actually didn't even expect him to go into this position when he played h5. Remember, we thought that really dropped his ability to defend by a lot. But he said, no, these pawns are fine. Don't worry about it. You got a garbage A pawn. You're not going to be able to do anything with any shelter. I will always draw this position. Maybe Kamsky pushed that A pawn a little too quickly, but still, I didn't see how to make progress. And as I said, performance is sometimes more important than rating. How you're performing right now. His performance rating, in fact, is the highest of the entire event, even better than Kamsky's. His performance showing that he's playing at an elite level, and now he's got white. With everything to play for, he wins it. He's the U.S. champion.
Fantastic. Jen?
That's right. That's hard to call Gata Kamsky the big favorite now because he has to play with the black pieces. I'd say it's pretty even chances at this point. What do you think?
I thought that Gata was a 2-1 favorite going into the match. This makes the situation a little bit more like only a 55% favorite.
Okay, so you still think he's a slight favorite because if the game is drawn, you like his chances in the Armageddon.
Yeah, and the weirdest thing about Gata's play in this tournament, which has not impressed, he's not playing a world championship caliber that we know he's capable of. He's actually playing better with the black pieces. You'll recall his game against Shabalov earlier in the tournament, which might have been Gata's best game of the tournament. Where he played great and won it with the black pieces. So we've got everything to play for, and we're going to be coming back for the second playoff game. When does
and first we're going to take a couple of tweets from the hashtag US Chess Champs. We'd encourage you to send more as we
a great website.
Go through this playoff. And we got a couple comments about the word nerd in Spanish. Poker Addict that missed the flop says that the word for nerd in Spanish is nerdioto. Sounds like Spanglish to me. And we got another one, Oliver Cashman Brown, who says that apparently the Spanish language word for nerd is empollon. Okay. So we got to be careful what we say on the broadcast because people will look it up and prove us wrong.
Wow. Mouth is zipped.
Next task for you guys is study this rook game in the break. And as we head to break, I think we got one more comment from Grandmaster Ashley.
Yes, Jen, I just wanted to point out that Gata himself said that he has not been playing well with the white pieces, that he's been playing much better with the black pieces. That is kind of interesting for the moment because let's say he only draws with black right now and doesn't win. What's going to happen in the Armageddon game if Ramirez gets black? He's shown that he can draw. Gata will have to go for the win with white. How they're going to bid is going to be really interesting, but we'll save that until if and when it comes up. Guys?
All right, and we are going to be back in just a few minutes for the second game of this playoff match between Ramirez and Kamsky to determine the U.S. chess champion. And in this game, of course, Ramirez is going to be able to take a shot with the white pieces. I can't wait to see what's going to happen. We'll be right back with more.
Yeah, we should come back. Well, they're going to have camera here, so we can come back 5 minutes early and chat and stuff.
this is the beginning of the game.
Exactly.
All right, welcome back to the 2013 U.S. Chess Championship playoff. We've got a Ruy Lopez in this game. We were kind of expecting, actually, for the Ruy Lopez to occur last game.
Exactly, and sorry, we got a little late on the start. We were working on getting the board all set up nicely. We've got a Ruy Lopez. I'm trying to figure out the position. Castles, bishop e7, I believe, rook e1, b5, Gata Kamsky, black, bishop b3, castles,
and it looks like he played the anti-marshal, which we were discussing in some of the other games.
Right.
So, yeah, we saw in another game in this tournament, John Bryant just brazenly took this pawn and won a nice game. You mentioned that you prefer the anti-marshal system h3 over the a4 anti-marshal.
Exactly. It's a choice, but a2, a4 in this particular case, maybe to get Gata out of his preparation that he had hoped maybe to play the Marshall Gambit to begin with, and then at the same time maybe was expecting h3. Gata has played, obviously the move a4 sets up the threat of a takes b5. Gata handles that threat with bishop b7 in order to defend the rook on a8, and now a key moment for Ramirez. Does he want to play? He has played d3. I was about to say, does he want to keep the game closed with d3, which he chose to do, and d7, d6 quickly by Gata Kamsky. In this line of play, I'm used to seeing the move knight c3 with the idea of slipping the knight either to e2 and g3, or in some cases, jumping to the square d5. So knight c3 is my primary move here. Let me just see what else. h2, h3. A usual move that we do see in the Ruy Lopez. In this particular position,
Queen d7 played.
Very quickly. The idea behind queen d7, this knight is actually misplaced on the square c6. Black would like to play the move c7, c5. The move queen d7 sets up a maneuver of knight d8, e6 to c5. And
or perhaps a lot of times in this opening you try to play knight a5 and c5, but it's perhaps a bit difficult to do that now.
Well, okay, so from White's point of view, suppose White plays the move knight c3 directly. Knight a5 in this case, just don't fall for one terrible possibility of, don't you dare think of capturing that pawn on a4.
Oh no.
Because of bishop takes a7, and knight c3 was played.
But we can just play c5 at that moment.
Yes,
instead,
exactly.
And just continue to try to get our stake in the center.
Exactly. So knight c3 was played, threatening a double capture on b5 after a trade of rooks. But here, if I were black, I would probably opt for the move knight c6 to d8, keeping the b5 pawn protected. And I just think the knight is better placed on the e6 square than on the a5 square.
Gotcha. Yeah, it's true. We do gain that tempo against the bishop, but you don't think that's worth as much in this closed position.
Right, exactly. I'm just thinking that, and let's see, Gata makes a fool of me. Knight a5 was Gata's choice.
Well, one thing with the knight a5 is there are some variations where you get a chance to play b4 and b3 and sacrifice that pawn.
Right.
And regain it later.
And b4 has been played. And we're up to date. Not so clear on the clocks, but it looks like they're pretty well balanced.
And Alejandro here played knight d5 and instead of your move, knight e2.
Right. Now, knight d5, all right, well, this capture, if you take on d5 and black, pardon me, if White makes a mistake of capturing with the pawn, then the
now
move
b3 does work, yes.
looks really good. Because
the pawn that we get is bigger than the pawn that you get.
Precisely so. So we got to go back. After knight takes d5, it's almost a certainty that bishop takes d5 has to be played. And now black has an interesting up, and he has played knight takes d5, bishop takes d5, automatically played, as easily predicted. Now this bishop on b7, I'm just a little curious.
You think he has a lot of options here, huh? He could play
Right.
c6, he could play bishop takes bishop. What would you lean towards?
Exactly. It's not an easy choice because, quite frankly, it's hard to make a judgment as to which bishop stands better. For example, c7, c6, bishop jumps back, c5. Can you say that this bishop, which looks pretty good, is better than this bishop? I'm not 100% sure.
Especially because at some point we might be able to arrange that d5 push, which will definitely neutralize your bishop on a2.
And on the other hand, opening up the c file from black's point of view is pretty attractive because after takes, knight takes.
And no, he did play the other variation. He played c6, bishop a2, c5. There might be a slight inclination for Gata to try to keep pieces on the board here if he thinks that otherwise the situation is balanced. So he chose this line, and I think that we have another balanced position on our hands. I think that Gata can be relatively pleased with the outcome of the opening, although white still seems to have a pleasant Ruy Lopez type position. And Alejandro did play c3.
Right. On the other hand, if I were black, I would be a tad concerned about this knight sitting out here on this wayward square a5. But here's one potential idea. How's this for a pawn sacrifice if black were to make this pawn sacrifice? If you take with the pawn, this bishop isn't that happy, and after moves like rook c8, attempting to win this pawn back, that creates a very intriguing position on the board. I like the material, but I'm not 100%. Oh, pardon me. There's a knight e5 shot. I definitely don't want to allow a knight e5 shot. So don't take it in that case. But then maybe the idea is to play king to h8 to release the f-pawn.
Well, let's take a look and see what Grandmaster Maurice Ashley thinks about the outcome of this opening so far.
Jen, I think so far the position definitely is equal, nothing really special for white or black. The question is, does that favor someone? I mean, certainly Kamsky wants to have an equal position that he coming out with the black pieces, but then again, he knows the further this goes, the more random the elements are going to become, and especially in that Armageddon game that will be looming right at the end of this. So certainly looks like a very tepid opening. This is the kind of position, if you saw this at the 2,700 level, you'd be thinking this is going to be a draw for sure. By the way, before the game, Kamsky was in his deep meditation mode at the board for several minutes while Ramirez walked around casually. Kamsky stayed at the board, seemingly clearing his mind for the battle ahead. Jen and Yas?
I was about to say, from what Maurice was just saying, we were watching the webcam. I saw a very, very stoic Gata Kamsky. The Gata Kamsky I know so very well. He wasn't revealing anything. Earlier in the tournament, we saw Gata oftentimes clutching his head and shaking it. Very, very unusual for Gata. Normally we see him this
Right.
clear. And we do have a move by
That's right. I mean, Gata Kamsky
Ramirez.
did win his first 4 games and then went on to draw his final 5. And it seemed like ever since he missed that bishop h3 shot, he had been shaking his head. But today, back to his professional sense, Daniel Wrench from chess.com says that it looks as though that Ramirez is seeming body language poised to win this championship. And he asked me what the vibe is on site. Well, the vibe is on site just a lot of tension and
Definitely.
a lot of fans for both players, but I can't really say one way or the other. It does seem like last game, Ramirez seemed very proud of himself, and as he should be, to draw so comfortably with the black pieces.
True. Maurice has some highlights for us. Maurice?
The last move by Kamsky and Ramirez are both frowned on by the computer. Bishop to c6 seemingly threatened this pawn on a4, but in fact wasn't really a threat because if the pawn were taken, that discovered attack was still possible, as you mentioned before. Yeah, so the computer really liked, after this move, bishop to c6, taking on b4, taking back, and then d4, just ignoring the pawn, a la his last game against Larry Christensen, where he gave up his a-pawn for fantastic play. But Ramirez missed this opportunity to just go for it in the middle of the board after bishop c6, and instead he played the move after bishop c6, bishop d5, which the computer now says is better for black. The computer likes bishop takes, pawn takes, pawn takes here, a couple of trades, and then a rook to b8. And it says black is a little bit better here. So Ramirez missed a big opportunity to bust open the center of the board. Guys?
Interesting. So evaluating it, this is slightly better for black just because black controlling the only open file of the board.
That's
correct?
Right.
And that often happens in the Ruy Lopez, that black actually has superior development in a lot of cases. White's play is more luxurious, geared towards the closed position. So when things open up, once in a while, it's black who's really on top in the Ruy.
Indeed. And this move, bishop d5, that is a very, very strange move. You don't really want to voluntarily accept those double pawns. And as Maurice pointing out, very experienced grandmaster Gata Kamsky is used to playing both sides of these lines in the Ruy Lopez. Although he just made a slip in no, he has captured on c3. I thought I saw rook b8 without the capture. He did, and he did follow the computer suggestion, which is a very straightforward idea. Clearly, this knight on a5, you don't want it tagged on the edge of the board but if this knight can go slip to b3, and even in some cases be supported by the move c5, c4, I have a slight bias for black's position. c4 was played by Ramirez, so there is this opportunity for knight b3, which I think you should take advantage of. That knight is not doing anything otherwise on the a5 square, attacking the rook. The rook has to keep the sight of the pawn on a4. And how about a move like rook b4, not necessarily just jumping for joy in capturing this bishop at once, and then quickly doubling on the open b file. I'm beginning to like Gata's position more and more, and we spoke about this earlier, that he's actually been playing better with black in this event, and it's beginning to show here as Gata works on establishing a queenside initiative.
That's right, and white, on the other hand, no real play.
Pretty passive pieces. I mean, nothing has passed the fourth rank, so except for this pawn on d5, but all of white's pieces quite passive. Black's looking really good here. I don't know if Maurice has more insights here, but this position, I think, favors black.
Yes, I got to agree with you. Black is for choice here. Ramirez, especially allowing this trade on d5 that freed black's f-pawn, that I didn't really like at all. Now black has nowhere to be concerned in the entire position. What is white supposed to do here? White has no positive plan at all. This is not the kind of position you want to play against one of the world's elite players. Kamsky knows he's better now, and it's just a question of playing just the right moves. I like black.
That's right. It's just so difficult to come up with active plans for white here. Can't really play in the center because the d4 push, traditionally an active plan in the Ruy Lopez, is blocked off. Can't really play on the king side. Just no real pushes to make, correct?
Exactly.
So you're kind of confined to anticipating black's threats and hoping to neutralize them.
And Gata has played the anticipated knight b3. After all, that knight on a5 was off the edge of the board. Now it leaps into the battle. Knight b3 attacking the rook.
It looks like Alejandro played rook b1, it looks like he played.
Okay, rook b1.
Yeah, so because probably if queen takes a4, knight d2 would be a strong response.
Okay.
So that pawn is still not actually
on pre because of knight d2, and as you mentioned, this pin, oops, that would not be good. All right, so rook b1 was played, and that provoked Gata to capture this bishop. On the surface, it appears that this bishop is weak, actually passive due to these 3 pawns. Actually, that's not the case. This bishop, when, as Maurice mentioned, after you play f5 and put your bishop on f6, that could be a very strong bishop indeed.
Now, queen takes c1 was captured, so this is now the sacrifice is real. Now, if you take on a4 immediately, rook a1 should be sufficient. And
sure? Are
no,
you,
maybe not.
Are you going after? But you're right. You do have rook
You
a3.
have rook a3, but then you can maybe, or I was thinking you could also perhaps just protect the
pawn.
Protect the pawn after rook a3, which you couldn't have done earlier, right?
Right.
But here you do have just queen to b6,
Backing it up.
Although I could set up enough major pieces, I think, on that pawn that it's going to be hard for you to continue to defend, right? After queen to a1, if you play rook a8 and I play queen a2,
or maybe rook and then queen a2, you're probably your favorite to win the pawn back.
It looks like that.
Not really. Are you so sure? I've got this nifty little bishop to d8 to protect that pawn when I need to, and this knight is a long way from capturing that pawn. If you don't capture the a pawn, it stays on the board for a while. Let's go back to the game position just to see the situation at hand. Gata Kamsky reaching for and grabbing.
And he has grabbed the pawn. This could be it. I mean, we're going to really see whether or not Ramirez's compensation is sufficient here. And if it's not, Gata Kamsky could very well win this game. And rook a1 was played. Grandmaster Maurice Ashley, what do you think about this pawn grab?
Well, I like the pawn, but the computer thinks it's equal. The computer is already saying white has sufficient play here, that this pawn is going nowhere fast, and maybe Kamsky had played a little bit too quickly grabbing the pawn. Instead, should have played the move rook to b4, cementing his rook on that b4 square, and a pass pawn on b4, because the trade was practically forced, would have been better than this choice. It thinks that white is firmly in the game, but still Ramirez is going to have to find all those moves in order to prove that he has compensation.
All right, and we do have rook a3 on the board, and now Gata's got to decide where he wants to put that queen. We're predicting that he'll backtrack with the queen and try to passively defend the a-pawn, but if Ramirez can't round it up, black, of course, will be much better. So that's what we're predicting at this point. Now, for all of you guys listening at home, wondering what's going to happen if this game is a draw, we are going to have more playoff action. We're going to have what we call an Armageddon game. That's a death match game, but it's not going to be blitz. It's also going to be rapid. In an Armageddon game, black gets draw odds. So for the rapid game to be fair, white tends to have a lot more time, right?
Right.
Now, normally they have the 5 minutes versus 3 minutes blitz game. Instead, in the rapid game, the two players bid for how much time they're willing to take to sacrifice to get those draw odds and the black pieces.
So, by the way, Gata did back up with his queen. He played queen b7, retreating to protect the pawn on a6. Very quickly, queen a1 was seen, and we had checked a line that went rook a8, rook b1, queen a7, protecting the pawn and hoping to set up for a5. But then I think this move, rook b3, threatening to come down to b7, would give sufficient counterplay for Ramirez, and he would indeed be able to win his pawn back. So I'm thinking that Armageddon, what you mentioned, is looking more likely.
That's right. As pieces come off the board, you can't help but think this game might turn out to be a draw as well. And then we're going to be forced